everyone. Welcome to Sam's Summaries. This episode is a deep dive discussion into Sam Fury's summary of Chapter 2 from the book Models by Mark Manson. It has been created with the help of AI. The chapter is titled Power in Vulnerability. You can read the original post at samfury.com.
All right, so get this. Today we're going to deep dive into something that might just turn everything you thought you knew about vulnerability on its head. We're cracking open Mark Manson's models and zeroing in on Chapter 2. Have you ever, felt like you were holding back in conversations? Like worried about saying the wrong thing or just being judged?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Manson, he actually argues that fear, that vulnerability might actually be the key to, deeper connections.
It's funny you should mention that because one of the most interesting things Manson does is he doesn't just talk about vulnerability as spilling your deepest, darkest secrets. He says it's about anything that puts you at risk of rejection. And that can be anything from, asking someone out on a date to telling a joke that totally bombs.
So it's not just about wearing your heart on your sleeve. It's about putting yourself out there, period. I get how that applies to dating, but does he really say this is important for all kinds of relationships?
He absolutely does. He makes the case that this applies to building trust and rapport with anyone, whether it's, romantic or platonic. Think about it this way. If you're always playing it safe and never risking rejection, are you really letting people see the real you?
That's a good point. It's like you're building walls instead of bridges, right? But this whole idea of being vulnerable can be so scary. I know I've definitely held back from saying what I really think because I was afraid of what people would think.
Oh, yeah. And that's actually where Manson's concept of being non-needy comes in. Now, this isn't about being aloof or distant. It's about being comfortable with your own flaws and not needing constant validation from others,
So you're actually more vulnerable when you're not desperately seeking approval. That seems kind of counterintuitive. How does that even work?
It all boils down to confidence and authenticity, really. When you're not constantly seeking validation, you radiate this sense of self-assurance. And that is incredibly attractive to people. You know what I mean? People can sense that you're not putting on an act.
Yeah.
And that makes them more likely to trust and open up to you.
Oh, okay. So it's like by accepting yourself, warts and all, you're kind of giving others permission to do the same.
Exactly. And that's where the real magic of deep connection happens.
Yeah.
Manson, he uses the example of opening up about your dreams, your values, even your fears, things like that. It's about letting people see the real you, the good, the bad, and the messy.
Yeah. Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. But I have to admit, the idea of intentionally putting myself out there like that still makes me, squirm a little. It feels risky.
Oh, it is. It is. There's no getting around that. But Manson has this really interesting way of framing this risk. He compares it to forming a new habit. Like, remember when you first started exercising or learning a new skill? It was probably pretty awkward and uncomfortable at first.
Oh, tell me about it. I remember when I first tried yoga, I felt like a pretzel gone wrong.
Right. But the more you practiced, the easier it became. And the same thing applies to vulnerability. The more you push through that initial discomfort and put yourself out there, the less scary it becomes.
So it's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. And Manson, he gives some really practical advice for how to actually do this. One thing he emphasizes is reframing rejection. You see, we tend to see rejection as this personal failure, but he encourages us to see it as data.
Data. That's kind of an interesting way to look at it. What does he mean by that?
Well, he means that every time we put ourselves out there and get rejected, we actually learn something. We learn about ourselves, about the other person, about what works and what doesn't work.
So instead of beating ourselves up over rejection, we should be analyzing it, figuring out what we can learn from it, and then using that knowledge to adjust our approach in the future, right?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. Manson argues that the more rejections you experience, the less scary they become.
That makes sense. If you're constantly putting yourself out there, you're bound to get rejected from time to time. It just becomes part of the process.
And he actually says something really important about this process. He says it actually makes you more attractive.
Wait, what? How does getting rejected make you more attractive?
Because it shows that you're not afraid to go after what you want. It shows that you're confident enough to handle rejection without falling apart.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to get it. It's like the more you're willing to risk rejection, the more people see you as someone who's secure and confident in themselves.
Right. And that, in turn, makes you more attractive. It's like a positive feedback loop.
So the key to becoming more attractive is to become more comfortable with rejection. That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. And it goes against a lot of what we're taught about how to be successful in relationships, especially romantic relationships. But Manson argues that it's the key to building truly authentic connections.
Mm.
And, that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's about being real, being genuine, and letting people see who you truly are.
Exactly.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense, but it still feels a bit overwhelming. Like, where do you even begin with all of this? It's not like I can just flip a switch and suddenly become fearless in the face of rejection.
Right. It's definitely a process, you're right. Manson actually suggests starting small. You don't have to jump in the deep end right away. You can try practicing vulnerability with people you already feel safe with, like close friends or family.
Okay, that's a good idea. It's like a warm-up before the big game, yeah.
Yeah.
But what if even that feels too intimidating?
Well, in those cases, Manson also recommends therapy as a great resource. It can be incredibly helpful to have a safe space, a non-judgmental space, to explore these feelings and vulnerabilities with a trained professional.
Yeah, I love that he brings that up because I think there's still kind of a stigma around therapy, but it can be so transformative, especially when it comes to unpacking those deep-seated fears and insecurities that might be holding us back from really connecting with others.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because therapy itself is an act of vulnerability. You're literally opening up to a stranger about your deepest thoughts and feelings.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. But you're right, it's like a training ground for vulnerability in other areas of your life. Okay, so we've talked about the why and how of vulnerability, but I think it's important to kind of circle back to Manson's core message, which is that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's actually a superpower.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It allows you to, forge these deeper connections, build trust, and most importantly, I think, express your authentic self. And that authenticity, it's magnetic.
Mhm.
It draws people in because it's so genuine and relatable.
It's like letting go of the need to present this perfect, polished version of ourselves and just embracing the messy, imperfect beauty of being human?
I think a lot of people struggle with that idea, especially because we live in a world that often feels, obsessed with projecting an image of perfection. We see it everywhere
Mhm.
on social media and advertising, even in our own family sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's like we're constantly bombarded with these unrealistic expectations of what it means to be successful, happy, attractive. And in the process, we lose sight of what really matters: connection, authenticity, being true to ourselves.
Right. And Manson is basically saying, screw that.
Yeah.
You know, he's encouraging us to tear down those facades and just embrace our imperfections.
Mm.
He's saying that the real magic happens when we allow ourselves to be seen, flaws and all.
It's like he's giving us permission to be human. And I think that's such a powerful message, especially in today's world.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's a message that I think resonates with a lot of people. Because deep down, we all crave that connection. And we all want to feel seen and accepted for who we truly are.
Yeah, I think you're right. This has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm starting to see how vulnerability isn't just about like improving our relationships. It's about living a more authentic and fulfilling life overall. But I'm curious, what stands out to you the most from Manson's perspective on vulnerability?
Honestly, what resonates with me the most is the idea that vulnerability is not about seeking validation or approval from others. It's about, owning and accepting who you are, flaws and all,
Yeah.
and sharing that authentic self with the world. It's about self-acceptance as the foundation for genuine connection.
I love that because it really takes the pressure off, doesn't it? If you're no longer seeking validation from others, you're free to just be yourself fully and authentically. And that's when you can truly connect with others on a deeper level. It's about embracing the beauty of imperfection, both in ourselves and in others.
That's beautifully put. And it's funny because when you stop trying so hard to impress people,
Hmm.
when you just let yourself be, you often end up making a much bigger impact.
Yeah, it's like the paradox of trying too hard. The more you focus on yourself, the less attractive you become. But when you shift your focus to connecting with others, to being genuinely interested in them, that's when you truly shine.
That's so true. And you know what else is interesting? When you embrace vulnerability, you're actually modeling that behavior for others. You're giving them permission to be vulnerable too.
Yeah, it's like a ripple effect. One person's willingness to be open and authentic can inspire others to do the same.
Yeah, it's like we're creating a more authentic and connected world, one vulnerable interaction at a time. But I know, like from personal experience, taking that first step can be really daunting. what advice would you give to someone who's listening to this and thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but where do I actually start?
That's a great question. I think Manson would probably say start small. You know, it doesn't have to be this big grand gesture. Maybe it's sending that text you've been hesitating on, or sharing a personal anecdote that you usually keep to yourself. It's about, pushing yourself just a little bit outside of your comfort zone.
Okay, that's a relief to hear, because I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea that vulnerability has to be this big dramatic thing, but really it can be as simple as just saying, I'm feeling a bit nervous, or I don't really know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And you might be surprised by the positive responses you receive.
Yeah.
People are often drawn to authenticity, and your willingness to be vulnerable might just inspire them to do the same.
It's like we said earlier, vulnerability begets vulnerability. It creates a safe space for others to kind of let their guard down too. And that's how real connection happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you go about your day, I encourage you to think about the areas of your life where you might be holding back due to, fear of vulnerability. What could you unlock by embracing it? What new connections might you forge? What deeper levels of intimacy might you experience?
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful invitation to step into our truest selves, even if it feels a bit scary at first. Because ultimately, vulnerability isn't about weakness. It's about strength. It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience with all its messiness and beauty.
And in doing so, we open ourselves up to a world of, deeper connection, greater authenticity, and ultimately a more fulfilling life. So, go out there and be bravely vulnerable. You might just be amazed by what you discover.
That's great advice. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the power of vulnerability. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep being your amazing, authentic selves.
Thanks for tuning in to Sam's Summaries. If you found this episode useful, let us know with a like, follow, and share. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to visit samfury.com to get free access to all of Sam's original summaries, which you can download as PDFs, as well as other exclusive content. It's all completely free at samfury.com.